So first of all, thanks for joining us for our second webinar. It's the first one where we have a guest coming on board to share their experience and expertise. So it's really exciting for us. Just like a bit of information before we get started, and hopefully how you guys can get the most out of it. Throughout this webinar, I'm going to be monitoring the chat. So you should all have the ability to send a message to me within the chat function of Zoom. So if you send them throughout the webinar, I'll make sure that I'm taking notes of them here. So if you do want it asked, maybe you're not feeling brave enough, or you just want me to ask on your behalf, please do send any questions that you have for Flavia into the chat, and I'll make a note of them and we'll get through as many as we can. So that's probably the best way to do it. If you wanted to know more about like future webinars we're doing or access to the resources that we're making as the trust for the EdTech program, then this website is how you can join our mailing list. So about fortnightly emails will go out. The video to this will go on YouTube. So again, it might be a useful link for you to go and put your name against. And then that's pretty much it really. So I'm just kind of going to do a bit of a brief introduction in terms of what to expect for this session. So I'll just do the introductions and then we're going to hand over to Dr. Belham. We'll have a brief Q&A and then a close, hopefully for about 10 past, 5:15. So that's what this session should look like for us all. Just to give you a bit of context for those who aren't familiar. So at the minute, this is where I am. I'm based in King's Leadership Academy in Warrington, part of the Great Schools Trust. So 2 schools in Liverpool, 1 in Bolton. So we're an 11 to 18 free school, obviously based in the Northwest. This is the school's 9th year of being open. The EdTech program, for those that don't know, it's an initiative where schools who are able to reach out and ask for more support in terms of their EdTech provision. So for example, blended learning, help with lockdowns and, to ensure that teaching and learning still carries on. This is the program to kind of ask for that free help. So we're kind of paired with about 40 or 50 schools in the Northwest. If you did want a bit more information about the EdTech program, best bet is just to go to Google and type in EdTech program, or you can search for the London Grid for Learning, and they're the logistics behind pairing schools together and helping with the support. So that's just like a little bit of a brief one. Myself, I'm Benjamin Barker. I'm a vice principal at the school, a lead of teaching and learning. 12th year of teaching. This is the 8th of this school. For anyone who's familiar with the area, I was previously at Ormiston Bolingbroke in Runcorn. And if you did want to reach out to me like beyond this webinar, then the best place is probably Twitter. And there's my handle if anybody is interested. And our guest today is Dr. Belham. So former professor of biology, PhD in cognitive neurosciences at UCL. Currently responsible for Seneca in Brazil. So Seneca, if you're not aware, is a fantastic platform, not only for pupils, but as well for staff learning. And I've also put Flavia's Twitter handle on there, Flavia Belham, PhD. So this session is, as you're all aware, just effective learning strategies. With all of the webinars we're doing, we're trying to give platforms to people who we feel are best placed to help you all in education, or some of you I know are parents and you just want to know a bit more. So the idea with this session is looking at the cognitive science behind it. So how do humans learn, and what's the best thing we can do in lockdown for our pupils in terms of planning from a cognitive science standpoint, and really research informed. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand over to Dr. Belham. And just as a reminder, I would really, really welcome any questions you have. Just throw them in the chat to myself and I'll, like I say, make a note and ask them later. So Dr. Belham, I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, Ben. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Very happy to be here. So I'm gonna share my screen so you can see my PowerPoint. And like Ben said, if you have any questions, just type on the chat and then we can talk about them after I finish talking. So let me do them. Screen share. Yeah, can you see that?
Yep, we can see your screen now.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so present. All right, good. So Ben already shared that, but this is my email. If you want to get in touch with me, it's flavia@seneca.io, and this is my Twitter handle @Flavia Belham, PhD. And the title of my talk, as you know, is Effective Learning Strategies for Children During Lockdown. So just a very quick introduction about my path. So you already know that I am a former biology teacher. I am from Brazil, you probably already guessed that. I have a degree in biology. I taught in a Brazilian school biology for 2 years. I did my master's there, and then I moved to London to do my PhD in cognitive neuroscience to learn more and research how people of different age groups learn. So basically we did a lot of experiments and tests with younger people, adults and older adults, to see how they learn different information. So can I just say something just before we go on, Ben, just as a thing? You can disable the waiting room now, so that people just join directly and you don't have to let them in, and then we don't get to see the pop-ups.
Yeah, I'll get them in a second. I'll try and disable that now for you.
Yeah, that's just as a tip, because I don't know if you can see the pop-up every time. Anyway, so before I actually give my talk, I like to ask teachers, so you, to think about this slide. So which of those strategies do your students use? Just think about it. You can write on the chat if you want, but just think about it. Do they follow a timetable? Do they read notes? So when they are preparing for an exam, for example, do they test themselves? Do they highlight textbooks? Do they use visual elements? Do they write summaries? What do they do? Just keep that in mind for a while and we get back to that slide later. So what are effective learning strategies? That's on the title of the talk. So what are them? They are strategies that have been at least validated to work based on research. So they are not guessing, they are not feelings, they are like actual research and interventions and controlled studies that have shown that these strategies work better than other strategies to help students learn. Okay, so these are what we call effective learning strategies. They are basically evidence-informed or evidence-based strategies. And there are a few of them that I wanted to show to you. You may know some of them or you may not know some of them. I've tried to always keep in mind that we are talking today about a very specific situation, which is lockdown and remote learning, which is different, as you all know, from being in the classroom. So, but some things stay the same. So retrieval practice is, in my opinion, the most important learning strategy. And that's the idea that you can actively bring information back to mind, and that helps you learn better than if you're just passively reading the same information over and over again. There are several ways that you can do that. So you can have flashcards, you can use classic past papers for students to practice. You can ask students to learn, to tell themselves how and why. So instead of just trying to memorize what or who or when, it's like how and why. So really try to elaborate on the knowledge and try to get explanations, explain to themselves or to their friends or to their families in the case if they're home, why things work, how things work. That helps their brain to really process the information and create connections between different pieces of information so that that information is stronger in their memory. And on a lockdown situation, if you are using Zoom, for example, you can have breakout groups. So you can actually, I don't know if you know that, but you can actually have group work on Zoom. So there is some way on the menu here that you can click breakout and then you separate all your students into small groups and then they can do actually group work where they can ask each other questions, for example. That would be a good way to do retrieval practice when you are home and they are home as well. So the idea here is that when you retrieve information, you reconsolidate the information and it gets stronger in the brain. The only thing to be careful here is with misconceptions, and that's, I think, particularly important on remote learning because you don't really have that much control on what students are doing. So retrieval practice does not discriminate between right and wrong, right? Whatever you practice, whatever you actively bring to mind is going to get stronger. So if you actively bring to mind the wrong information, that wrong information is going to be stronger in your head. So, or in students' heads. So basically, it's really important for the teacher to be careful that students are practicing and retrieving and reconsolidating the correct information and not getting the misconceptions even more power. This is just a nice slide that I use to explain what retrieval practice is. So the idea is that if you think about a maze And the entrance of the maze is the question and the exit is the right answer. If students are always just reading the same notebook or textbook over and over again, then there's always only one path that leads them from the entrance to the exit. But if they are doing retrieval practice and asking each other questions, trying to answer things, trying to explain things to themselves, to other people, really connecting different pieces of information, then there are multiple paths that lead them from the entrance to the exit. So it's easier to get to the exit. So that's how I try to see retrieval practice. You create all of these connections in the head, which means it's easier for you to connect information, to understand that information, and to remember that information in the future. So learn. The other effective learning strategies, actually two, but I always put them together. It's spacing and interleaving. So that's the idea that you can spread out study sessions and switch between topics every now and then. Always, and that's the most important thing, revisiting past topics. So this is not new. We've known this since 1885 when Ebbinghaus tested himself. So he learned a series of words and then he forgot 20% of them after one day. And then he tried to learn them again, so he read them again, and then it took him 2 days to forget 20%. Then he learned them again, and it took him 4 days to forget 20%. So the idea is that every time that you revisit something, that becomes stronger in your head. So even if a student gets 100% correct in a quiz that you give them, it doesn't mean they actually learn that forever, as you know. They're gonna forget that. So the important thing is that you revisit that information, even if they got everything right the same at the initial time. And I think that that's even more important during remote learning, because again, you know, things happen and maybe someday that student's internet connection is not working and they actually missed half of your lesson, or something else was happening at home and they didn't really do their homework on that day or that week. So really revisiting past topics is really, really important to keep students not forgetting. So avoid them or reduce the forgetting. They're always going to forget something. That's just how the brain works. And then also regarding lockdown, I think helping students to create a study calendar is very important. So that not only in your lessons, in your live lessons or videos, you are revisiting past topics, but that when they are studying on their own, doing the homework, revisiting, reviewing, practicing, learning on their own, they have a calendar, like a chronogram or something, that helps them to separate when to study what and how long to do new stuff and revisit old stuff. So that's something that's hard to do, especially if you're 12. But with teachers, we can help them having this nice calendar so that they can follow a routine that uses spacing and interleaving when they are studying at home. And then the last one that I wanted to show is dual coding, which is the idea of combining words with visual elements that makes it stronger and easier for your brain to process information and to remember that information afterwards. You just have to mind, so several ways to do that. You can use diagrams, mind maps, colors, timelines, anything that is words and visuals is dual coding. You just have to mind the overload. If there's too much going on, if there's a video, a PowerPoint, a book, an image, you talking all at the same time, it actually reduces learning other than improving. And for lockdown, if you're using Zoom or Google Meet or whatever, you're probably using some type of PowerPoint presentation like I'm doing now or some equivalent of that. And there are several very good tips on how to make good PowerPoint presentations that use dual coding but do not overload students' cognitive abilities. And I would recommend a course that we have free on Seneca, completely free for you to do, written by Oliver Caviglioli, who is the main researcher, educator on dual coding, I'm going to say in the world, or at least in Britain, but probably in the world. And he has written a free course for us. On Seneca, you can just log in and take the course, and there's a whole session on how to have good PowerPoint presentations so that you have the benefits of dual coding without the danger of overloading. So I'd recommend that. And I also recommend you can download these are for free on the internet. You can just look and you find the PDF. There are 2 articles that explain more effective learning strategies. So they will explain these 4 and others. One of them is this one, Strengthening the Student Toolbox. And the other one is Principles of Instruction, which you can read. These are articles written for teachers, so they are very practical. They're not just academic, far away from the classroom. They are actual practical advice. And there are some online communities that you can join, or at least follow, I guess, on Twitter, to learn more and keep in touch with effective learning strategies and cognitive science and education. So there's a whole website called retrievalpractice.org that gives you what they talk about. The learning scientists are amazing, very user-friendly, very easy to understand. Twitter, Research Ed, this series of webinars that Ben is organizing is a good example as well. And there are some blogs that I follow. They are very good at putting cognitive science into education. And there's also, if you are a science teacher, I think Ben is probably on that list as well. There's a CogSci email list where people just share tons of good, useful information on email. All right, good. So we have all that information. We know what the effective learning strategies are. We know how to use them, but do students use them? And that is the question. So now we can go back to that first slide when I asked you what of those strategies students use. Usually I get people to raise their hands, but on Zoom I can't see it. But usually teachers say that students highlight textbook, read notes, and write summaries. But from what I just told you on this presentation, they should be doing the other three. So the effective learning strategies are following a timetable, use visual elements, and test themselves. So most students will do actually the poor strategies. And we at Seneca, we did the survey when we started in 2017. And only 24% of students that we interviewed were using effective learning strategies. So that was just our tiny research to get started. But there are actual peer-reviewed papers about that show the same thing. So this one by Karpik in 2009 showed that only 11% of students use retrieval practice when they are learning something. In 2007, only 16% of students were using testing to enhance learning, which is retrieval practice. And in 2017, out of the students who knew what the good strategies were, 34% of them were still not using them. So even the students who knew they should be following a calendar, they should be testing themselves, they should be using visual elements, they were still really not doing those. They were still using highlighting and reading. There's just some more details I can send you. If you send me an email, I can send you all of those papers so you can read with more detail later. But that's just one example of the 2007 paper. So the second question here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but anyway, the second question here, how do you decide what to study next? The correct answer, the effective answer would be, I plan my study schedule ahead of time and I study whatever I've scheduled, but only 11% of students said that. 59% of them said, I study whatever's due soonest, which is, I think it's very, very common. You just study for the next exam. You don't follow a calendar, you don't follow a chronogram, you don't follow a schedule. And then you're only learning for the short term and not for the long term because you're not revisiting information. You study for the exam that you have next week and then you never study that topic again. You're just gonna forget. The other question, do you usually return to course material to review it after your course has ended? 86% no, so that's what I just said. The moment you take the exam and you hopefully pass it, that's it, done. I don't ever have to study there again, forget. And the last question is, imagine that you are studying and you become convinced that you know the answer to a question. What would you do? Most of them said, I'm gonna put it aside and focus on something else. And only 36% of them, so a third of them said, I'm gonna make sure to study that again later, which is what I said in the beginning. Even if you get something entirely correct the first time, it does not mean that you're gonna remember that forever. You have to revisit that. And then the second one, just that one here, from 2009, so 83% of students said that they do rereading as the main type of studying. Only 10.7% said that they do self-testing, which will be retrieval practice, and only 1% of them said that they are the #1 strategy. So it's really, really very few students who use retrieval practice to study. And then this is a bit old now, but I like the picture you remember from the black hole. The idea is that I see that we have all this information about effective learning strategies, but it's like it's being sucked into the black hole, and then students are around that floating, and that information does not access them. They just don't use everything that we know it would benefit if they used it. Cool. So why don't they, right? If we know what they should be doing, if scientists know, educators know, everybody knows, why don't they use those strategies? The first reason is that they don't know. So teachers may know, scientists, researchers may know, students don't necessarily know. Okay, and so I just want to bring two quotes. So first one's not a quote, just paraphrasing from the Karpik paper that I mentioned before. They concluded that students are not aware that retrieval practice enhances learning, and that educators should inform students about it and relate that to research. So teachers should be telling students how to study, and they should be telling students why to study in that way. And then the second one is a quote from the learning scientist, and she says, this is Megan, by the time students arrive at college, they should be expert learners, as most will have been in school for 13 years. However, college students are largely unable to select effective learning scenarios and apply those to their independent learning. So if somebody like Ben has been a teacher for 12 years, you expect him to know a thing or two about teaching. But students have been students for 13 years when they get to uni, and they still don't know how to study. So something's wrong with the way that they train to be students, because they like professional students and they just don't know how to do it. So something has to change. The second reason is illusion of competence. I hope that illusion works virtually as well. I think it should. So this has nothing to do with my presentation. It's actually a bad example of dual coding because I'm just distracting you from the real information, but I like it. The circles are not moving, it's just an illusion. But what is illusion of competence? It's the idea that when you're learning something with the question and the answer, you overestimate your own knowledge about that topic. Okay, so when you're studying, the most common way to study is just reading the textbook, and that has all the information. So you overestimate how much you know about them. When you are testing yourself, you only have the question, right? You don't have the answer. So it feels like you don't understand that topic, and it feels like you understand that topic better when you are reading the book. But actually, you're just overestimating how much you understand there when you're reading the book, because you have all the information there for you. So there is an article that I think it's quite cool. It's from 2009. And participants had to learn pairs of words, and then they had different revision sessions. So either the two lists of words were presented as a reading list again, or as a quiz. Okay, and then participants had to judge how well they thought they would remember each pair of words on an exam that would happen the day later or the week later. So this first graph here is how much students got on their, not students, participants got on the exam. Don't worry about the feedback and no feedback, that's something else in the article, but what I wanted to show you is that students or participants who reviewed by doing tests, they got better grades than the ones who studied by just reading, which is retrieval practice. We already know that. But the interesting thing here is what they thought would happen. So you can see that's exactly the opposite. So students who were learning by just reading, they thought they would do a lot better than students who were learning by testing. But actually those are the ones who did well, and the ones who learned by reading did less well. So that's just a very clear illustration of the illusion of competence. And then the third reason why students don't use effective learning strategies is that they are very time consuming and hard to make. So, you know, just very honestly, planning study sessions weeks ahead is harder than cramming. Creating mind maps is harder than just copying from the book, and answering questions is harder than reading. And also in lockdown, you have all the extra stress and anxiety and uncertainty and less support because we're not there. So that all of that just makes it even harder for students to use effective learning strategies. But there are things that we can do to help, and that's the positive part of the talk. There are, like I said, several online resources for teachers, and there are resources for students as well. So the learning scientists, they have a website for teachers, and they also have a website for students. So they have videos explaining how to use space practice, how to use retrieval practice, and several others. With Nimish led, who is another teacher, physics teacher, we wrote an article on how to create a revision timetable to maximize learning based on spacing and interleaving. So there are several useful things online for students. And the idea here is that we should be explicitly teaching them how to study, just like we explicitly teach them about biology and chemistry and literature, right? So you could have, during the lockdown, you could have actual live lessons that you have the ones that you talk about the content, but you have also lessons that you just talk about studying. So how do you study? How do you revision? How do you learn? Why do you learn it like that? Let's try different techniques. This is the effective one. This is the not effective one. Let's try. And I think it's even more important. It's always important, but probably even more important to have parents involved, because if I ask my parents how to study, they're gonna say highlights on the book and read that over and over again. So parents don't know how to study. So we could be telling them as well, so then they help their children. Like I said, there are YouTube videos that tell children how to study, and help students to have a study routine and a calendar and a schedule, so that they have a more structured study routine, so that they don't get lost, and they make sure that they are using especially spacing and interleaving to revisit past topics, and not just forgetting all about it the moment that your Zoom call finishes. This is, I'm not gonna play for you, but that's just one example of a really, really good video for students that's done by this guy named Ali Abdal. And it's a really good video. He shows evidence, he shows articles, and he talks in a very student-friendly way because he is a student. So I'd recommend checking out his channel. It's a really good video about how to do retrieval practice, spacing, interleaving, etc. for students. And then the second thing that we can do is actually use effective learning strategies when we are teaching, right? So there is a suggestion out there that says that only 20% of your lessons should be new stuff, 80% should be revision of past content. That may or may not be doable depending on how much curriculum you have to cover, but it's the idea is that you should always revisit and then do a little bit more. And I think this is a really good strategy. It was obviously made to be done in the classroom, but it can easily be done online as well. So the idea here is that you ask students something, and then they write on a piece of paper what the answer is, without checking any books, without asking you any questions, just from their own head. And then they highlight there, let's say in pink. And then you say, okay, now go to your textbook and complement your answer and highlight that in yellow. And then the next week, you do the exact same thing. You ask the same question and they follow the same procedure. And then they can compare how much pink and how much yellow they have. So the idea is that the amount of pink should be increasing and the amount of yellow should be decreasing, right? Because you're using retrieval practice, because students have to answer the question. You're using spacing because you are revisiting past topics the next week. It was dual coding because you have color-coded information. And you also have metacognition because students are thinking about their own learning. So they are very obviously comparing two sheets of paper and saying, I have more pink here or less pink here. That means I'm learning more, I'm remembering more information than I did before. That's a really good strategy. It's a really simple one, low-tech, budgety one. All they need is like paper and some highlighters, which they should have at home. And it's a really good strategy because it follows all of those previous ones. The other one by Kate is also something she started there by showing this on the PowerPoint, on the projector on the classroom, where you can easily do that on your account, on your screen, like I'm doing now, if you just make it bigger. So the idea is that you have several questions on the screen, and then they are color-coded, depending on when that topic was taught in class. So let's say the blue questions here are topics that were covered last lesson, the red ones last week, the green ones 2 weeks ago, or further back. And then the students who get to answer them get different points. So if you answer a blue question, you get 1 point. If you answer a red question, you get 2 points, and so on. So what Kate's doing here is using retrieval practice because they have to answer, and using spacing and interleaving because she is revisiting past topics and she's mixing topics. So she's not just doing unit 1 and then only doing unit 2 and then only unit 3. There are questions about 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're all mixed together. So she's using all of the good strategies in one very simple, I think, technique. If you go to her website, which just follow her on Twitter, I forgot the website now, but 87 History, she has templates for all of the subjects, so you don't even have to create all the questions in the first time. You can just take what she has and then come up with your own questions once you're more familiar with this technique. And then this is Adam Boxer, who has a retrieval roulette, which you may have heard about. It's an Excel spreadsheet with a formula that selects from previous topics a random amount of questions for you to ask your students. So the idea is that you create that sheet once and you can actually download from his website a complete Excel table from all subjects, or at least most subjects. And then you can tell the Excel, say, I want 5 questions from last lesson and 15 questions from everything else we've seen before. And then we'll randomly generate those for you to ask your students. Again, easily done on a lockdown situation. And then the last thing that I wanted to show you is tools to make it easier. So like I said, it is hard to have those effective learning strategies, and there are tools that can help. Several online platforms, obviously Seneca is the best one by far, but there are several other tools that you can use as well. So as a summary, we know some strategies are more effective than others, but students don't use them because they don't know them, because it feels like they don't work, because they are really hard to do, especially during lockdown. But we can help them by having evidence-based lessons where we revisit past information, we use retrieval practice, and we use dual coding, by giving them online tools that make their lives easier, and by explicitly teaching them how to study. Again, that's my email and my Twitter. If we have time, I hope we do, I don't know what time it is, we can go live to the Seneca platform, and then I can show you how it works and what kind of things we've been doing to help students during the lockdown. Ben, is that all right? Or should we stop
yes,
now?
we've got about 10 minutes, so I was thinking we could start
enough.
the questions at 5. So do you want to go through some of the platform and how it works now for 10 minutes, and then we'll start the questions at 5?
Super. Okay,
Thanks.
so I'm gonna go here now. All right, so like Ben said, I'm managing Seneca Brazil at the moment, so there will be some Portuguese stuff mixed here, but when you're using, you all be in English, don't have to worry about that. That's just my own account who is global and I also have some French courses, it's like all mixed. But anyway, this is the student view of the platform. We have a bazillion of courses, like literally thousands of courses for most age groups, most subjects, or most exam boards, if you're doing the CSE or A levels, different types of courses, and then foundation and higher. And the way it works, so if I just choose, let's do biology. And that's standard assessments. That's just a specific one. Let's find a bigger one, normal ones. So biology here. So you have all the content here. It follows the specs. So in this case, the AQA, the CSE specs. And then let's choose one, so you know how it works. So it starts with a summary of the information that's covered on that topic. We use a lot of images. We use GIFs. We use memes. So we use gamification and also dual coding. So students will go here, read the information. And then when they click continue, they're gonna see questions. And there are like loads of different types of questions. And that's because we wanna use retrieval practice. So the main focus of Seneca's methodology is retrieval practice and then interleaving, spacing, and dual coding. Okay, so we are not based on video lessons. We are not based on long text. We are based on quick, active methodologies, active learning, and retrieval practice, interleaving, spacing, and dual coding. So all of the good strategies that I mentioned before. So students will answer here. They get immediate feedback, which is something that also helps learning because they don't have to wait 3 weeks until the teacher managed to mark the exam or the quiz. So they know if they're getting it right, they know if they're getting it wrong immediately. Then they see some more content, and then they see questions. I'm getting everything wrong here, but just so you know, there are all sorts of different types of questions. And then the platform, the cool thing is that the platform is keeping track of all of my answers, and then it's gonna select different questions for me depending on my answers, so that it is optimized. There is a quick video here, I'm gonna skip them. So basically the platform is adaptive and personalized, so I will see different questions from Ben, because Ben may be doing very well on one topic and I may be doing very well on another topic, and the other way around. So the idea is that you really optimize students' learning because you're giving them what they need to learn, okay? And then by using effective learning strategies like retrieval practice, dual coding, interleaving, and spacing. There is a smart learning mode that suggests you what to study next. So that's a bit of interleaving and a bit of spacing. So it suggests you that you have to revisit some information to get better at that. And that's basically how it works. Okay, so just wanted to show you one example. If I go to the teacher view, oh, I'm actually on a student, sorry, let me just change that. Okay, so if I go to the teacher platform now, again, I have a lot of things in Portuguese, but don't mind that, it works the same way. The idea is that we have a lot of things to help teachers keep track of their students. That's the main thing of Seneca. We help two main things. We help students to learn better by using effective learning strategies, and we help teachers to know information about their students without having to work extra hours together. There's a big report from the government from last year showing that teachers work a lot of hours outside of their working hours just to mark and keep track of students. And what Seneca does is to give information about their students easily like that. So basically, if you can have information about how long your students have been studying each topic on each period, their insights where you can test, not test, you can select. Again, sorry, it's in Portuguese, but you get the idea. You select sessions and then you can see the grades from each of those students. For each topic, you can see the best score, the most recent attempt, the worst score, number of attempts, time. Everything is like a really very good data selection for you to know what's going on in your class without having to spend hours looking for that information. So Seneca presents that very easily for you. It's color coded if you have, this is all a fake class, but if you have real students here, you'll be color coded. And you can also, if you go on past assignments, you can, which is something that's really cool and it's new, you can smart reassign. So you can, this is an example of how it looks like with real students. With smart reassign, you can set the assignments again to students based on their previous score. So this is great for recovering students if they are falling behind, or if we go back to the lockdown when we don't know what they learned, or if when they go back to school again, that we don't know how much was lost during the lockdown, we can actually set assignments to students based on their previous score. And the Seneca platform does that for you. And that's a really cool feature that really, really works really well for keeping track of students and making sure that none of them is really falling behind the other ones. All right, so that's a really cool topic. So you just name it. And you can even share that with other platforms. So if your school is a Google platform or Microsoft, Google School or Microsoft School, you can share the Seneca assignments via those two platforms, which is really handy for online learning as well, since you may already be using those other two platforms. Okay, and the other thing that we have is analytics for SLT. So you can apply to be one of those schools, and then we give you a proper report, not only about one class, but about all of the classes and all of the students on your school. So if you are the head teacher or head of department or head of year, you can apply to get there. It's free, it's completely free. And then you get a report about everything that your students are doing, what the teachers are doing. So you can really have like this really great database showing everything that's happening to your students, so you can prepare better for when they go back to class or during lockdown, so it can help you understand what's going on, so you can have a better intervention and make sure that they are really getting the best that they can get during this weird situation that we are all living. That's the idea here. On the teacher platform, again, if you want to go back to see the courses, you just go on student platform, and all of the teacher features are for free, which I want to mention there. Everything that we have for teachers, all the data, all the insights, all the assignments, reassignments is all for free. Okay, so it's the same if I choose something else. That's only biology here. I just want to show you another one just for 1 minute so you see. Let's do one non-science subject. Let's do history here. It's the same methodology. You have the topics here. So let's do Vietnam. You have, for history, there will be a lot of photographs because that makes sense. And then the same. So you have the questions to answer several different types of questions, lists, word fields, etc., for students to understand what's going on, and then use active methodologies and retrieval practice and spacing and interleaving and dual coding to learn better. And all of that, like I said, it's being tracked by the platform, and it's going to be presented to you on your teacher platform without you having to do any extra work. And it will also be presented to your head of department or head teacher for them to keep track of everything that's happening with your students during the lockdown. And it's free. So, and it's used, if you don't know, by 4 million people already. So 4 million students and teachers use Seneca, most of them in England, but also people, we have about 150,000 people in Brazil using Seneca, and a few thousand in the US and Mexico as well. And that is it that I wanted to show you. If you have any proper questions about that, you can let me know and I'll spend more time on this.
Thanks for that, Flavia. So what I've done is I've had some people message me privately with some questions. So I figure maybe if I could fire maybe 3 of them at you and we'll spend a couple minutes going through them. Is that all right, Flavia?
Yeah, sure.
So just quick one. So from Jude, I am going to be sharing the slides Flavia's put together, and I'll tell you how I'm going to do that later. And Ian, this is being recorded and it's going to go on YouTube. And again, shortly afterwards, I'll share how you can get that information. So yeah, all of this is freely available. So Flavia, the first one that someone sent to me was, are there any like learning myths that you still hear happening in education? I know you spoke about the students reading, and rereading and so on. Are there any learning myths that you hear in education that maybe we could tell people now, the research says this maybe isn't as effective as you first thought?
Yeah, I mean, the big one is the learning styles. So that's something, I can find the paper and I can send that to you. I don't have it top of my head now. But they asked teachers, I think it was in the US, whether there was a thing or not. And like a ridiculously amount of teachers said, yes, that's totally a thing. That's absolutely a thing. And it's not. So there has been like several researches showing that learning styles, so visual, kinetic, auditory, whatever there was, that's not a thing. So students can have preferences. So like I myself, I like reading a lot more than I like listening. I like podcasts. Like I don't do podcasts because I don't have the patience to listen to people talking, but I read a lot of articles and blog posts. But that doesn't mean that I learned better by reading than by listening. And it does not mean that teachers should be changing their style of teaching for each student because of what students think works best for them. So that's the difference. Of course, people like things different, that's obviously, but it doesn't mean that they learn based on that preference, and that you should be changing your classes because to fit that preference from students, because they'll only create more work for you and will not help them to learn more.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. So I'd imagine maybe people who think, those learning styles is a thing, they may have heard it from someone else, or they just, haven't had access or even know that the papers that disprove that are out there. So I know you mentioned, Barack Rosenstein's, principles of instruction. And I agree with you, it's a really easy read. It tells you the theory, like in a snippet, and also how to apply it to your classroom. For those people listening or those who may be watching this, where would you kind of point them in the direction if they want to know more about, the research and the science behind learning? Where would you send a teacher, to find out more information?
Yeah, so I think the learning scientist is a good starting point. And then there are several researchers who I think are like great at what they do. And then what I do when I'm learning something, I choose one person who I know knows a lot about that, and then I start reading their things, and then I start reading what they read, and then I start reading what those people read, and then I go like branching out. So learning scientists have several things, and then you can see what they are quoting, and then go to those people, and then what do they quote, and then go to those people, and then you end up like a million different very good sources. In terms of other names, Bjork is a good one. Rodinger, I don't know if I'm pronouncing them right, but Bjork, Rodinger is another one that's very good. Those blogs that I mentioned on my slides, they always have collection of papers to read about this, papers to read about that. At Seneca, I didn't show that, but I can show you that we have several CPD courses for free, written by very great people. So we have courses written, like I said, by Oliver Caviglioli, as an example, by Michael Childs, course by Sam Strickland, by Kate Jones has a course there as well, for maths, for sciences, for well-being, for cognitive science, for dual coding, for retrieval practice, for everything. And they're all for free. And they bring several other information that you can follow them from there.
Yeah, so Mike Charles actually started working with us this year, so he's going to be on the future webinar, and Ollie on the dual coding. He'll be doing a session as well. So if anyone is interested in those, definitely worth finding the future webinar dates, because they'll both be on. And then maybe the last one is, do you think because of some people in lockdowns or pupils learning from home, maybe being a bit more reliant on technology, do you think that's a good thing, to take advantage of these learning strategies? Or do you think it's a bit of a mixed bag, in terms of being the best thing for the pupils, moving more to devices or working online?
I think there is a difference between just being on your phone and just using effective learning strategies on an online platform, or watching your teacher give a live lesson on Zoom. So I think like device time is one thing, and then actually using technology in a good way is another thing. I think like everything in life, you need a good balance. Pizza is great, but if I eat pizza every day, I'm gonna have a problem. So you don't have to not eat pizza. So I think that will be the important thing. Just if they are online, if they are on their phones or on the laptops, just try to make sure that they are doing something that is useful and effective for them. And I do not think that we should go back to just whiteboards and printed worksheets. Now that we have a lot of schools, I know, especially in Brazil, that's a different level. People did not use at all technology there, like at all. Everybody were using just not even whiteboards, like actual chalk boards, and just printed worksheets. And then suddenly they have Seneca, and they have Google Classroom, and they have Microsoft Teams, and they have Quizlet. And I'm talking to a lot of teachers there, and they say, I'm not gonna go back to just a whiteboard. Even after we go back to normal lessons, school open, I'm still gonna be using technology, because there are a lot of good things that you can do. Especially from the teacher side, having this data visualization is much easier to do it with the online platform. And if you had to mark question by question, student by student, and then come up with your own table to show grades. So if you can do that, this automation, that's just easier.
Fab. So I can see there's more questions coming on. So what we'll do, just in terms of time, is I'm going to share these questions with Flavia, or I'll try and answer them myself, and I'll put it out. So there's like a set of notes that come out with this video. So we'll make sure all the questions are answered. I just want to say a massive thanks to you, Flavia. I know, like, taking your time this evening to share. It's all been fantastic, and there's loads of praise coming through. I think people are either, it reaffirms what they were thinking about, like the cognitive side, or how they can best place their students, and like you say, how we can help teach them how to be better students. The reason we put this whole webinar on was this idea of, a pilot knows how the plane works, or, a nurse knows how the human body works. And as teachers, if we can get a bit better at knowing how students learn and just how that process actually works, then we're maybe better placed to help them through this journey, especially in this weird period of time that we work in. So I'm just going to share one more time just the details if anybody is interested in watching the video of this over again, or even getting answers to those questions. So if you go to this website and just put in your email address, I will send out the YouTube video, also along with any slides that Flavia's kindly provided, and links to any of the resources or websites or papers. They're all going to go in an email shot out probably tomorrow or Saturday. So if you go to bit.ly/edtechmail and put your email address in, it's run off of MailChimp. So if you want to unsubscribe, you can do it at any time. We don't pass the information on. It's purely a way for us to share all the fantastic resources that Flavia has used today, and push them out to all of you. So again, Flavia, thanks ever so much for your time, and for everyone who's kind of joined in. Thanks again for taking your, part of your time this afternoon and evening, probably after a really long day. And we'll be back next week. If you want to know more, then again, this website, and we'll push out future dates for you. So thanks again, and see you all soon.
Yeah.